Welcome one more day to Talking with Alicia. Today we are going to talk about attention to diversity in education. Let's start by learning a little bit more about the historical evolution of attention to diversity. In prehistory of special education, we can find two periods that differ in that one has no explanation for the deficits and the other does. The first period is called psychiatric obscurantism because, due to the lack of knowledge in science, mythical and mysterious explanations were given to people with deficits. They believed that infanticide was a solution to abnormalities in children. Although the church considered them a product of the devil, it condemned infanticide, which led to the abandonment of many children, so the first asylums were created to protect these children. During the late Middle Ages, the Inquisition came into play, and this institution reinforced the psychiatric obscurantism. In the 16th century arrived the psychiatric naturalism, where nature itself is the basis for explaining behavioral disorders in humans. Between the 16th and the 18th centuries, the first educational experiences for people with sensory disabilities were developed by private initiatives. Other types of deficiencies, such as mental deficiencies, will not be taken into account. At the end of the 18th century, a reform of the institution was initiated, influenced by social movements such as the French Revolution. In the 19th century, the birth of special education took place in the so-called age of institutionalization, that would last until the middle of the 20th century. In this period, people with deficits were still marginalized, but progressively, society became aware of need to attend to people with deficiencies. Thus, through the 19th century, special schools for the blind and deaf were created, and attention to mentally deficient began in institutions created for this purpose. However, the birth of psychometry at the beginning of the 20th century reinforced the separation of people with disabilities from the rest. Thus, special education was born as a segregated educational system. At the end of the 60s, the principle of standardization appeared, which stated that people with mental deficiency should develop a life as normal as possible. After this, the concept of integration emerged, which considers the differences between people as a positive aspect. Inclusive education shifts the focus from the personal conditions of the students to the conditions that the school must meet. Now we are going to talk about the different educational laws that have affected the attention to diversity in our country. The first step towards inclusive education is found in the Moyano Law. This law regulated education for people with some disabilities such as blindness or deafness, but it did not mention other physical or mental disabilities. In 1970, the General Law of Education arrived, at the end of the Franco dictatorship, and with it, special education was organized and established for the first time in Spain. It no longer refers only to young people with disabilities, but also to those with high abilities. In 1990, with the LOCSE, a student with special educational needs is understood as the one who had more learning difficulties than the rest of his or her peers. The causes of these needs could be different, for example, the social-cultural context or overgiftedness. This law includes special education within regular education, thus including all students in a single educational system. Therefore, it is a great step forward in understanding inclusive education. However, in 2002, there was a step back in the development of inclusive schools, with the introduction of the Law of Education Quality, although it was never implemented. But quickly, in 2006, with the arrival of the law, we returned to the principles of the LOCSE, now speaking also of students who enter late, who have specific educational difficulties or problems with their social circumstances. However, the law was modified in 2013 with the LOMCE, where students are separated according to their abilities, resulting in a ramified educational system. LOMCE defends the need to improve the quality of education of all students. Attention to diversity becomes a fundamental part of the educational system, and for this reason, schools must develop a plan for attention to diversity, which will include measures to attend to all students, and in particular those who require educational attention that is different from the ordinary. For example, special educational needs, specific learning difficulties, ADHD, high intellectual capacities, late incorporation into the educational system, or due to personal or school history conditions. Now let's put a practical example of a girl with some special needs related to intellectual functional diversity. Intellectual functional diversity is the amount of limitations in mental functioning, communication, personal care, and social level. We must not forget that intellectual disability is not a mental illness. People with this kind of disability have their own dreams, like all of us. If her deficiency is not really serious, she must attend regular schools. If not, she must attend special education schools or open classes. In addition, teachers of hearing and language and therapeutic pedagogy will be required. If necessary, she should also be attended by the school's educational technical assistant. On the other hand, important changes will be made to the curriculum depending on the severity of the disability. She must have an individualized work plan. This plan will be developed by the teachers and coordinated by the tutor after a report from the corresponding advisor. The plan will contain the student's personal data and school history. relevant information from the psychopedagogical report, adaptations agreed by the teaching team, aspects to be considered for promotion, specific attention from teachers and complementary educational care staff, and collaboration with the family. It will also contain the necessary individual curricular adaptations. On the fifth sheet, the tutor will carry out the adaptations in coordination with the area teacher, the PT, the hearing and language teacher, and the compensatory teacher. The sixth sheet corresponds to the teacher of hearing and language, and the seventh will be completed by the PT. As the 8th sheet corresponds to a student with high abilities, it should not be completed. And finally, the 9th sheet corresponds to the psychotherapist. In addition, we as teachers will have to attend to her in different areas such as personality, motor skills, attention, perception, intelligence, memory, language, behavior, sociability, and cognitive aspects. The center should create the diversity care plan by following these steps. First, the teaching staff participates in the preparation of the plan together with the management team, which will supervise the preparation. Once it is finished, the management team will present it to the teaching staff, who will have to approve it. Finally, the school council will finally approve the plan within the framework of the school's annual general program. I think I deserve a good grade in this subject because I have worked really hard, mostly because I really like it and I think it's really useful and necessary. I have learned that the teacher doesn't respond in the same way to all the students with difficulties, and I have also learned the amount of difficulties that the student can present. Of course, I'm much more aware of the importance of attention to diversity. In fact, I think that we should have more subjects related to diversity. Preparing this video, I have deepened in the content, having cleared the different classifications of students depending on their difficulties, or knowing a little bit more about the individualized work plan.